In this video, I'm going to tell you how to use HCG as a monotherapy, even if you don't use testosterone. But before I do, please subscribe to the channel, like the video if you haven't already, and comment on the video for the sake of the algorithm. Now let's get started. If you haven't already, watch my video on how HCG affects thyroid function. In that video, you'll learn exactly what HCG is. For now, we're just going to summarize how steroidogenesis occurs in the male body. Steroidogenesis, by the way, is the synthesis of steroidal hormones like testosterone, estradiol, and so on. In men, this occurs in the brain, in the adrenals, and in the gonads, separately. The gonads, of course, are men's testicles. The gonadal synthesis of steroids is what we're talking about here and what HCG is involved in. Gonadal synthesis of steroids begins at the hypothalamus, and then the pituitary, and then the gonads. The hypothalamus releases gonadotropin-releasing hormone, and in response, the pituitary releases two important hormones. One is called luteinizing hormone, LH, and the second is called follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH. LH signals at the Leydig cells of the testicles in the synthesis of testosterone. On the other hand, FSH signals at the Sertoli cells for the proliferation and differentiation of sperm. But many people don't know that FSH also binds to Leydig cells' LH receptors and activates them also. FSH is the main hormone involved in the growth or maintenance of size of testicles. You can think of it sort of similar to TSH's role with the thyroid. TSH grows the thyroid and maintains its size. FSH does the same thing to the gonads. FSH is much lower in adulthood than it is in puberty. When in puberty it can reach levels of 7 or 8 or more in the American scale. Usually in adulthood it lies around between 2 and 4. So at minimal level, just maintaining the size of the gonads. So those are the two important hormones. To remind you, LH signals for the synthesis of testosterone at Leydig cells. FSH also signals there, but mainly signals at Sertoli cells for the proliferation and differentiation of sperm, and also grows the gonads. It's trophic to the gonads. Now, why would you use HCG? What HCG does is it replaces the function of LH. It binds to LH receptors with a greater affinity than LH does and activates them. It also has some other effects which you can learn about in the thyroid video about HCG. But here we're talking mainly about its effect at the luteinizing hormone receptor in the gonads. Why would you want to replace your own luteinizing hormone signal from the brain with HCG? When you incorporate HCG, your luteinizing hormone will reduce. Why would you want to replace it? Well, our life circumstances and lifestyle affects how strong our pituitary signals LH. So for example, if you have high estrogen levels, if you use something like an opioid, if you've recently experienced a difficult life circumstance like depression or losing your job or being broken up with or something like that, your LH will reduce its signal. So in the American scale, you may find that LH is around 5 or 4. And if so, you know that if your LH had increased to 8 or 9, you would produce more testosterone. Well, sometimes it's hard to manipulate your LH directly. It's actually not that difficult. You can block estrogen, you can block opioid receptors and so on. But you may not be able to get LH as high as you could by replacing it with HCG. Again, when you replace it with HCG, LH will decline, but HCG will replace its function at the gonads. So basically, you can break the signal between the brain and the gonads when the brain is telling you to produce less testosterone. In using HCG, you can replace the signal from the brain to the gonads, thereby inhibiting sort of the negative feedback signal from your lifestyle and so on testosterone synthesis. Now, this is not medical advice, and if you do this, do it under the care of a doctor. But how would I introduce HCG? Well, before I do, I would get a blood test and get an understanding of my testosterone level, my estradiol level, which is a kind of estrogen, my luteinizing hormone level, and my follicle-stimulating hormone level. You'll find that the luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone, which are measured in international units per liter, the luteinizing hormone will tend to be between, as I said, maybe 4 and 8 at maximum. And your follicle-stimulating hormone may be between 1.5 and say 4. Now, once you've gotten a baseline reading, I would then introduce HCG at a low dose and then retest the same parameters 10 days later. Why? Well, my goal would be to find out what is the minimum dose of HCG for my own body to replace my current LH level. To do that, you just introduce a low amount and then test a few days later, and if your testosterone is below what it used to be, you know you haven't quite replaced the function of LH. So you can increase it slightly. Once you get to your testosterone level that you had before introducing HCG, you now know what your current replacement dose of HCG for LH is. So if you want to get your testosterone beyond what it was naturally, you can increase it past that. But then you know that you can decrease it back to that level to maintain what your body was doing naturally. Now, when you increase the HCG dose, there are three considerations I'd like you to keep in mind. First, there is local aromatase activity around the gonads. So testosterone that's produced within us aromatizes more than testosterone, for example, that's injected with TRT. So as you raise your HCG dose and your testosterone goes above what it used to be, your estradiol will also. If you're concerned about the effects of estradiol, for example, on sex drive or venous thromboembolism, then you may want to control estradiol. You may want to use a forgiving aromatase inhibitor like exemestane called aromasin, which doesn't enzymatically inhibit aromatase, so it's quite forgiving. If you lower estradiol too much, within a few days it'll return. You also want to use baby steps with that and check your blood test to see that you're maintaining estradiol at a level that you want. For example, if you wanted to optimize sex drive, you want to keep estradiol between 15 and around 25 on your blood work. Second, you will also produce more DHT when using HCG as opposed to when using TRT. And the reason is when you inject TRT into your body, the 5-alpha reductase enzyme is really concentrated in the skin and also around the gonads. So testosterone that you produce locally or transdermal testosterone will convert more to DHT than injected testosterone. If you want to control for this, you can consider using something like a low dose of finasteride. And you can also measure your DHT originally if you're concerned about this. Before you begin and you get your baseline, you might want to measure DHT, and you might want to measure it each time when you do your blood test to figure out what dose of HCG you need to use. The third consideration is that HCG will play a role in signaling to the thyroid to grow. So you may want to consider using a low dose of something like levothyroxine, T4, under the care of a doctor to lower your own TSH, which is another signal for the thyroid to grow. So you don't end up with a lot of signal for the thyroid to grow. Now, how is HCG used? HCG tends to come in a form of a powder that needs to be reconstituted with bacteriostatic water. So you'll usually have a vial with a powder in it. So for example, if you bought yours from Amino Asylum, where they have a Chinese kind of HCG, you'll find a bottle that has a top on it and a little bit of a powder inside. What you need in addition to that bottle is bacteriostatic water, which you can also get from Amino Asylum. By the way, they have a discount code that I don't make money from. It's like Leo20 or Leo or something like that. That's one of the cheapest sources you can use for HCG. Anyway, you can get bacteriostatic water separately, and then you're going to need two kinds of syringes. You're going to need one needle that you'll pull out the water with and inject the water into the powder solution to reconstitute it. And that needle should usually be a little bit bigger, because an insulin needle will bend or get damaged if you try to insert it there. And second, you'll need a syringe or needle to inject yourself with. I like to use a 3 milliliter syringe with an 18 to say 22 gauge needle to reconstitute the water with the powder. And then I like to use insulin syringes, which you can find easily at Walgreens, by the way, which are usually 1 milliliter with a 1/2 inch needle that is something between 27 gauge to 31 gauge. So it's a much smaller needle, so you don't hurt yourself. You can buy both kinds at healthwarehouse.com, by the way. Oh, you'll also need alcohol swabs to use on the top of both of the vials. The vial for the bacteriostatic water and the vial for the HCG powder. Now, how do you reconstitute it? Well, basically what you do is you take your larger 3 milliliter syringe that has a larger needle, and the first thing you do is swab both of the tops, the bacteriostatic water top and the HCG top. You open the tops, then you swab them with alcohol, let them rest for a second. Then what you want to do is withdraw some air into your 3 milliliter big needle syringe and inject that air into the powder solution, because there will be a vacuum in that powder solution, and if you inject the water directly in it, it may damage the powder a little bit. So you will first want to inject air into it. Usually you're going to be injecting 1 milliliter of water per 5,000 units or so of HCG, which is the full bottle from Amino Asylum, for example. So what I would do is inject, say, 2 milliliters of air into that solution, and then I would swab the top of the bacteriostatic water bottle that I've already opened, and then I would pull out 1 milliliter with the big needle and big syringe and slowly inject that through the top, the stopper top of the HCG bottle. And as you do, you slowly inject it, making sure not to cause too much damage, and then leave the bottle to rest. It'll be a bit cloudy and it'll slowly mix together, and you leave it to rest for say 5 minutes before coming back to it. When you come back to it, you can use that same syringe with the same needle to withdraw the solution. And then what you do is you take an insulin syringe, which is a small syringe, take out the back, pull out the stopper, and you can backload the solution into the insulin syringe and then put back the stopper carefully. When you put back the stopper, you may put pressure. So you have to flip it upside down, put back the stopper from the bottom, tap it to get the air bubbles out, then force the air bubbles out. And now you've got 1 milliliter of the HCG solution, which contains 5,000 units. A couple of final notes. It's best to inject oh, by the way, the solution is injected into fat. So it's very painless, and when you use an insulin syringe, it's a very tiny needle, so completely painless. You just want to swab yourself and then you can inject it into fat. You can decide on your dose and you can escalate the dose as you get your blood tests and so on. But a couple of final notes. One is that not all HCG is created equal. So for example, the HCG from Amino Asylum is Chinese HCG. It's a little bit weaker than, for example, the Pregnil brand, which is my favorite. That's Pregnnyl. And second, you usually want to inject this in the mornings because testosterone has a circadian rhythm. It's higher in the daytime and lower at night. Now with HCG, it has a long half-life, so you may be injecting it every other day, but it would probably be better to inject it daily if you really wanted to maintain your circadian rhythms. Although, to be honest, there are better ways to do this. Something like intranasal testosterone in the morning or something else to give a little bit of boost to recreate those circadian rhythms would be ideal. But anyway, I just wanted to mention you don't want to be injecting this at night. That's not ideal. Anyway, guys, thank you for bearing with me. I hope this was helpful. And let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below. See you next time.